bien.
And you've recognized the face on the screen, Jacques Attali himself. We met 47 years ago when we were young. The first time I met him, he brought his book to me, and it was called L'Anti-économique, or Anti-Economy, with Marc Guillaume. What has happened since all those years ago? Has the economy moved on? What a very good question. First of all, as we are young and cheeky people, we know that we've got a lot to say in just 20 minutes. So do let us keep an eye on us. So what has been happening since the past few decades? Well, a lot has been going on, a lot of positive things in the world. Rather less positive in France, perhaps, although 47 years ago there were terrible things such as the death penalty, there were some extreme idealism and politics, things which were not going very well. But thanks to François Mitterrand in 81, things changed. But as things started to change after 81 up until 86, and then there has been if you take a look around France, you notice that things are very similar to those earlier days. But there's a lot of creativity that has been lost. We're not as industrial as we used to be here in France. So we have lost the sense of the longer term, and that's why we need some positive economy. So what is our situation compared to other countries in Europe? Well, there are some figures which we never look at. One in particular is thanks to the euro, we do not see our external commerce figures, our export trade figures. The euro shields that. That's rather inconvenient. We do not see those figures anymore. Very few people know that the commercial balance of Europe is that 30 billion for Spain, Italy is all very positive, Netherlands positive. However, the only country that is in the red is France, with 60 billion in the red. And so that really does demonstrate that we are a bit of a burden upon the other partners. And that's going to be accentuated this year further because we have been impacted by COVID with our air industry and our car industry, for example. For a long time, there are quite a few people who have said and continue to say that there's no problem if you lose your factories because the modern world needs services. And so it doesn't matter if you lose your factories. Well, even in my earliest books, I explained that the future is not going to be post-industrial, but hyper-industrial. The future contains a progressive evolution, and the human history is made up of services replaced by new services, which stand in for the previous ones. However, all mankind, all of the time we have been on Earth, we have been transforming machines, making everything into machines. We've got our washing machines, we've got televisions. The orchestra now is on the radio set. However, the heart of our history, for the better and for the worst, mostly for the worst nowadays. So we have to keep industry alive to serve life. That's what positive economy is all about. Never doing anything that is against the interests of the future generations. So artifacts, if they are at the service of future generations, then that's fine. But if we don't ask that question, we will have artifacts which are absolutely disastrous, i.e. artificialization of the ground, artificialization of nature, pushed to the extreme with all of the problems that transpire in our country, where we have some of the best scientific education and training. We have schools which are reputed to be very, very good. But at the end of the day, we are no longer producing engineers. How is that? Well, that's because we have the worst of globalization and not the better. The worst is the fact that globalization is not democratic. It's a globalization of the markets, particularly the financial markets. With music, Finance is the easiest human activity to virtualize, and that is why music and finance are the two sides of the same coin. One is positive, the other is less positive. Virtualization in finance has enabled it to become international, and it has drawn riches and wealth which should not have been there, because finance is supposed to be at the service of industry. But finance has started to serve itself. Finance takes wealth, uses it itself without redistributing it among industries. In Great Britain, for example, you've got the city there, which is at its own service, and New York the same, and France resisting that less, so that our engineers, who should have been using finance, are in fact producing finance. So we're talking about this positive economy here. Something tells me that in the years that we experienced when we were 25, 30 years old, production wasn't so intelligent because it never questioned itself. We wanted to consume, consume, consume. We saw that in the field of novels and literature. That's exactly the same. We were fascinated by things. But the meaning of things is of great interest, and this positive economy, could that be possible? There are some amazing sectors would be able to tie in with production again. Which areas, which fields are concerned, and what do we need to do to get back to that optimistic frame of mind? Because that's what positive economy is all about. Yes, we have to be at the service of future generations. In September, we and other friends are going to launch a friend which we are going to call Positive France 2022. We want to imagine what we have to do to make France a positive country as early as 2022. It has to be able to think in the long term. It has to be able to focus on the most important sectors for our future, i.e. social justice, the environment, good governance, and the industry that we need, the industry of life. And France is quite legitimate to be a major player in that, such as health, hygiene, food, agriculture, education, digital technology. We're much better than we think we are. And there are other sectors where we can really blaze a trail. We need to have a positive view of France in these sectors, and if we do that, France will become a big industrial, ecological, social and democratic power. When we see youngsters, apart from those who are interested in immediate gain, i.e. those who are going into the world of finance today, what if finance was a means rather than an end? If we take a look at youngsters who have a different point of view, we see that the world is such an interesting place. I see the economy of energy, where we have miniaturization, decentralization, the multiple ways, multiple sources of energy. It would be completely daft to have the same thing everywhere. No matter, but there are these big units that produce the same energy, and they are polluting at the same time. Yes, we need positive technology to serve human beings and to serve nature. And everything is much on a bigger scale than 30 years ago. 30 years ago, all of the cars we produced were all the same. The power plants were fired by coal. They were all the same. But today, there's such diversity. And that diversity gives meaning to the economy. Socially, democratically, economically, we have a meaning. That should be the case anyway. It will be great for that to become a project for society, to attract youngsters towards engineering as a career. The key to positivity is to draw people towards production and not to those parasite industries such as finance, when finance does not serve others. Finance, without wishing to offend my friends, finance has to be a boring business. It has to be a business which involves in taking savers' money, lending it out, or in investing it humbly to those people who know how to use money well. It should not be a business which uses money to speculate for the financial world itself. That implies that the world society, not only in France but beyond that, works for future generations, and that means that you don't produce aircraft and cars like we do today. It's not producing chemicals, plastics. It's not producing futile luxury goods. It's not even goods that qualify as works of art. And it's obvious that the crisis is showing that where we have needs, those areas which are underdeveloped. Something which has struck me, we see these luxury companies that make profit based on the things which are of least use. Not only clothes, but more accessories, fashion accessories. It's really strange to earn so much money with handbags. Who cares what's in the handbag? It's the handbag itself which is important. It's a metaphor for finance, if you like. There's another point which I'd like to underline. At the Académie Française, I sit in the Pasteur chair, and I have become an ambassador for the Pasteur Institute. So how can we change our relationship with knowledge, which used to be very positive for a long, long time? Progress equals knowledge. Knowledge now is the trademark of the elite, so it's a negative thing. What if we find a vaccine, for example, if it is valid and it's validated? 40% of the French people would not want to take that vaccination against COVID. And that is the really heart of the negative side of things. It's not just a negative economy, it's a negative society which no longer has faith in science. Yes, because knowledge has not been able to maintain its legitimacy. The situation has changed. Many French people, many young French people don't speak the language of science. Mathematics are abhorrent to them. Although mathematics should be interesting if they're taught well. So there's a kind of mistrust towards the elite of knowledge. And that is always what happens right before the phase of an obscurantist revolution. Let's take a parallel with the French Revolution. It's as if we'd skipped from a soft revolution through legislation in 1990, and we are just go into that hard phase of the convention, which would chop the heads off the knowledgeable, the erudite. We have to be careful of that today. All of the elite are in possession of knowledge. Let's not forget the historical disasters that we haven't learned the lessons of. And if we take a look around us today, we've got those people who stand up for obscurantism. The elite of knowledge is, when they say that the elite of knowledge is no more than the elite of power. In concrete terms, this terrifying sentence, before you chop someone's head off, the public does not need to know, as if we don't need to know. So we are in society which is more fragile. It's as if we'd shifted from enlightenment to the guillotine. Yes, it's a real threat. Let's not pretend to be old sages who are complaining because the past is better than the present or the future. The past was terrible. And we can say that because France had the death penalty up until very, very recently. If we want, let's take a look at the 20th, 21st century. There was the First World War, there was a terrible flu, there was financial crisis in the past also. The Nazis turned up and took power, the Second World War. So if a person lived in the right side of Europe, they would survive till their 90s. Although the 19th century started badly, it's not necessarily any worse than the 20th or the 21st. So that's crazy to say things were better before. However, that does not mean that the 21st century will not be worse than the 20th century, because There are many opportunities to do bad today, but we are working towards a positive France, a positive Europe, and a positive world, and it is possible. There's one point which you were broaching, and we'll wrap up on that, because we have very little time to talk about the long term. The very, very long term is wisdom, because transmission is the sustainable side of this question. And we note that democracy is called into question over time, because there are sorts of constant electoral campaigns. We're all being taken hostage by the short term. And we need strong regimes, because they apparently are going to last longer. We see more heads of state that want to be heads of state for life, and that's absolutely amazing. We are talking about a society where we don't want death, but we want our heads of state to last forever. That's another symptom, don't you think? Yes, the crisis highlighted two fascinating things. The first is that dictatorship fails more than democracy. The media have been fascinated by China. We've admired the construction of their hospitals at top speed. However, the Chinese, because they're in a dictatorship, are not allowed to communicate. They're not allowed to signal the triggering of an epidemic. They've lied to the world because they lied to each other. Whereas other parts of the country didn't have any masks or hospitals. This crisis has shown that a dictatorship does not function. What works is transparent information. It's media where you're allowed to speak out. It is the right, even within the elite, to contradict things. That is the key of creativity and the future. And the second thing which you evoked was that relationship to death. I'm fascinated to see that the relationship with death is absolutely key. Nothing can be defined without defining the relationship with death. And society may have a religious or a political or scientific relationship with death, however, or one after the other, in fact. But today, we don't have that relationship with death. In many societies, in ours in particular, there are so many reasons for believing in science or politics or religion, which say that death is denied. So the deceased are isolated, and because confinement speeded actions up a little bit, there could be a terrifying society in which all deceased, you, me, everyone who's listening, when we die, when we can't escape death anymore, well, they would be just dismantled. There would be no burial, no ceremony, no graveyards even, to give life its futile value of something which cannot be passed on in society, where we would forget what our real condition is, which would be the worst thing, because what we should remember is that life only has meaning because time is so precious to us. Our presence on earth is so very short. We have to make the best of it we can, and we have to pass on the value of time, the time that we have for passing information on, passing things on, so that the future generations will understand the mystery of life a little bit better than we can. When we've been through a crisis like we've just been through, we have to get back to basics, and the basics are that infinitely precious thing which is life, tied in with truth. So during this crisis, we've heard lies, and lies come at a great cost. How can we ensure, how can we glorify truth again? Is society sufficiently adult to recognize all of the elements? We're like spoiled children who don't want to see the dangers, because there's one thing which is absolutely terrible. One can catch COVID, but you cannot catch global warming. The truth cannot be shared, discussed. The truth is just there. You have to come face to face with it, even if it's terrible and even if it's peopled with ignorance. You have to just accept that. The media play a very important role, but the best way to not lie is not to lie to yourself to begin with. And that is a huge intellectual challenge. If you start with that, then you can go further. But the first lie which we tell is that when we tell ourselves that we are not mortal. That we are not immortal, rather. Thank you very much for confirming my mortality.